The air in the courtroom was thick with a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. Every person on the polished wooden benches held their breath, their eyes locked on the man who sat at the defendant's table. Officer David Miller, a 10-year veteran of the police force, smoothed down his perfectly pressed uniform, a confident smirk playing on his lips. He had put hundreds of criminals behind bars. This, he believed, was just another day at the office. He glanced at the woman sitting with the prosecution, Sergeant Anya Sharma, a decorated U.S. Army soldier. She looked pale and fragile, her arm in a sling, but her eyes held a fire that unnerved him. He dismissed it. In his mind, she was the one who had broken the law. He, Officer Miller, was the hero who had caught her. He had absolutely no idea that the judge, now clearing his throat to speak, was about to sentence him to death. Our story begins not in this sterile, silent courtroom, but 3 months earlier, on a rain-slicked night filled with the screech of tires and the smell of gunpowder, on the outskirts of the city. A catastrophic multi-car pileup had turned a busy intersection into a junkyard of twisted metal and shattered glass. Amidst the chaos, a lone figure, Sergeant Anya Sharma, staggered out from an overturned, unmarked vehicle. Blood matted her dark hair from a severe head wound, and her left arm hung at an unnatural angle, broken and useless. She was disoriented, her vision blurring, the world tilting violently around her. She had just spent the last 72 hours undercover, without sleep, tracking a domestic terror cell that was planning to bomb the city's central water treatment facility. The car crash was no accident. It was the violent conclusion of her mission, a desperate last-ditch attempt by the terrorists to escape after she had successfully neutralized their leader and secured the explosives. She had saved thousands of lives, but the cost had been immense. Now, concussed and bleeding, her only thought was to secure the evidence in her vehicle and report in. That was when the first police cruiser arrived, its lights painting the horrific scene in strobing flashes of red and blue. Officer David Miller stepped out, his hand resting authoritatively on his sidearm. Miller was a man who saw the world in black and white, a cop who prided himself on being tough on crime. But over the years, his toughness had curdled into arrogance, his confidence into a dangerous prejudice. He saw a chaotic scene, and his mind, trained to find the criminal, immediately began to construct a narrative. He saw Anya, stumbling, her clothes torn, her face covered in blood. He saw the high-end, unmarked car she had emerged from, now a wreck. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. He did not see a hero. He saw a junkie, a gang member, or a drunk driver who had caused this entire mess. "You, on the ground, now," he barked, his voice a whip crack in the night. Anya flinched, her head pounding. "Officer, Sergeant Anya Sharma, U.S. Army," she managed to say, her words slurred from the concussion. "I need to report a national security threat." Miller let out a short, derisive laugh. "U.S. Army, sure, sweetheart. And I'm the President of the United States. You look more like you've had a bad night on meth. Now get on the ground before I make you." Pain lanced up Anya's arm, as she tried to explain. "Please, listen. In the car. Evidence. A plot." Ignoring her pleas, Miller grabbed her good arm and twisted it behind her back with a force that was completely unnecessary. A scream of pure agony tore from Anya's throat, as the rough movement sent waves of fire through her broken arm and injured shoulder. He slammed her against the side of a police car, the cold metal a shock against her cheek. "You have the right to remain silent," he began to recite the Miranda rights, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. He saw her tears of pain, not as a sign of injury, but as a sign of guilt. He refused her repeated requests for medical attention, convinced it was a ploy to escape. For him, she was just another piece of street trash, and he was the lawman, cleaning it up. He arrested Sergeant Anya Sharma, a decorated war hero who had just saved his city, on suspicion of grand theft auto, reckless endangerment, and driving under the influence. As he shoved her into the back of his cruiser, he felt a surge of pride. He had no idea that this single act of brutal arrogance had just sealed his own fate. The next 48 hours were a nightmare for Anya. She was booked into the county jail, her injuries dismissed by the booking officers who trusted Miller's assessment. Her pleas for a doctor were ignored. Her requests to contact her commanding officer were laughed off. She was thrown into a holding cell, the cold concrete floor offering no comfort to her broken body. The concussion worsened, and a dangerous infection began to set in around the compound fracture in her arm. She was slipping in and out of consciousness, her life hanging by a thread, all while Officer Miller was back on patrol, boasting to his colleagues about the crazy drugged-out woman he had arrested. It was a full 2 days before the system caught up. A sharp-eyed clerk running Anya's fingerprints through the federal database got a hit so explosive it nearly sent him falling out of his chair. Within minutes, the jail was swarmed by stern-faced men, in dark suits and military uniforms. A 2-star general, his face a mask of cold fury, personally oversaw her transfer to a secure military hospital, where doctors worked frantically to save her life and her arm. The truth, when it came out, was devastating. The evidence in Anya's car, which Miller had impounded without a proper search, contained the location of the terror cell's secondary hideout. Because of the 48-hour delay caused by Miller's wrongful arrest, a key member of the cell had managed to escape. Worse still, a fellow undercover federal agent, who was waiting for Anya Signa, was killed in a shootout when the escaped terrorists ambushed his position. Officer Miller's world came crashing down. The case against Anya was dropped, and a new, far more serious one was opened. The city's hero cop was now the subject of a federal investigation. The charges were staggering: gross negligence, abuse of power, obstruction of a federal investigation, and a charge so severe it was almost never used against a police officer. Depraved heart murder in the second degree, for his actions directly leading to the death of a federal agent. The state, under immense pressure from the federal government, was seeking the maximum possible penalty. The trial of Officer David Miller became a media sensation. The prosecution, led by a relentless and brilliant lawyer named Maria Flores, laid out the case with chilling precision. They presented Anya's spotless military record, detailing her tours in Afghanistan and her numerous medals for valor. They brought in expert witnesses who testified that Miller's rough handling and denial of medical care had nearly killed Sergeant Sharma. The most damning testimony came from the lead FBI agent on the counterterrorism case. He explained, in stark detail, how Miller's actions had created a fatal window of opportunity. For the terrorists, Officer Miller didn't just arrest a soldier, Agent Harris said, his voice ringing with anger. He effectively became an accomplice to the enemy. His pride, his refusal to listen, got one of my agents killed. Miller's defense was weak. They argued he was just following procedure, that Anya's appearance was suspicious, and that he had no way of knowing her true identity. But on cross-examination, Flores tore him apart. Officer Miller, she began, her voice deceptively calm. When a woman, bleeding from her head, tells you she is a soldier and that there is a national security threat, what is the first thing protocol dictates you do? Secure the scene and assess the threat, Miller answered stiffly. And did you do that? I did. I assessed her as the threat. You assessed a decorated soldier, a hero, as a threat. Flores pressed. Did you search her vehicle for the evidence she mentioned? No, it was to be impounded and searched later. So, you ignored a potential bomb plot to process what you believed was a routine DUI. Did you ignore it, officer? Or did you simply not believe her because she was a woman? Or was it because, in your expert opinion, a hero isn't supposed to look weak and be bleeding in the street? Miller's face flushed with anger. I made a judgment call based on my experience. Your experience, Flores thundered, turning to the jury. His experience told him to brutalize an injured woman. His experience told him to ignore a plea that could have saved a life. His experience told him to trust his own arrogant prejudice over the words of a public servant. The prosecution contends that it was not his experience that made that call. It was his ego. An ego so large, it cost Agent Peterson his life. The closing arguments were powerful, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Their verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Which brings us back to the final, terrifying moments of the sentencing. The judge, a venerable man with a reputation for fairness, looked down at Officer Miller. His eyes filled not with anger, but with a profound and heavy sadness. Mr. Miller, the judge began, his voice echoing in the silent room, you took an oath. An oath to protect and to serve. That oath is a sacred trust given to you by the citizens of this city. It is not a license to bully, to intimidate, or to let your personal biases dictate your actions. You were given a weapon and a badge, and you used their power not to protect the innocent, but to harm a hero. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Sergeant Anya Sharma represents the very best of this nation. She sacrifices her safety for ours. On the night in question, she faced down evil and won. And when she emerged from that battle, broken and bleeding, in desperate need of a protector, she found you. And you failed her? You failed this city? You failed your badge? And you failed the memory of Agent Peterson, whose death is a direct result of your criminal negligence and depraved indifference to human life. Officer Miller's confident smirk had long since vanished, replaced by a mask of pale, dawning horror. He finally understood. He was not the hero of this story. For your crimes, the judge continued, his voice steady and resolute, for the irreparable harm you have caused. And as a message to all who would abuse the power entrusted to them, this court has reached its decision. The judge looked directly at Miller, his eyes holding no pity. David Miller, for the charge of depraved heart murder in the second degree, this court sentences you to the maximum penalty allowed by law. You are hereby sentenced to death by lethal injection. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Officer Miller's face crumpled in utter disbelief. A strung-let sob escaped his lips as the reality of the words washed over him. He was going to die. The bailiffs moved in, their faces grim, and pulled the Nasabi man to his feet. Anya Sharma did not smile. She did not feel a sense of victory. There was only a quiet, solemn sense of justice. She watched as the man who had caused her so much pain was led away, his life forfeit to his own arrogance. She had survived the battlefield, And now, she had survived the very system that was meant to protect her. As she stood up to leave the courtroom, her fellow soldiers forming a protective circle around her, she knew this was not an end, but a beginning. It was a stark and terrible reminder that the most dangerous enemies are sometimes not the ones overseas, but the ones who wear a uniform and betray the trust it represents.